I have the irresponsible plan to transform a Harley Davidson into an off-road capable dirt bike. And for that, we're going to find a suitable donor bike today.
It is still very early, but today might be a very exciting day because finally, after weeks of waiting, we might be able to pick up our next custom project.
But first, I need to pick up some cash. And for me, who just moved from Germany to the States, it's very interesting that you can basically do anything in a drive-thru here in America. In Germany, you would always have to walk to the ATM. What a waste of energy. Alright, now that I've got the Benjamins, it's time to hit the road and drive 3 hours north all the way up to Maryland. After leaving the city, we cross the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, which gives us a nice view across the Atlantic Ocean. And then we take Route 13 through the Eastern Shore region all the way up to Maryland.
I'm about half an hour away from what's hopefully going to be our next custom bike, and it hasn't rained in weeks, but today is the day that it's pouring. Fingers crossed that it works out, and then if everything works out, we're gonna have a bike in the back in less than an hour.
Fortunately, just before arriving in Westover, it stopped raining and I was able to
take the bike for a little spin, and it rips. It has a few upgrades that make this one special, so I'm excited to show you. It rides great, it looks great, and even though we're not gonna keep a lot of the bike, I think it is a very, very good basis. So I'm very excited for this project, and I'm going to show you properly when we're back at the house and I unloaded the bike and we have it in the garage, so you can have a proper look at it. So yeah, let's get it home safe, and then I'm very excited to show you.
Nice. Alright, and that is our new project. It's a 2002 Harley Davidson Sportster 883 XLH with roughly 16,000 miles on it. And if you've watched last week's video, you know that I have 5K for the whole build. And I already spent $2,700 just for the bike, which means that more than half of the budget is already gone. But I still think that it was a fair price and that we made a good deal, because the bike already has quite a few super nice upgrades installed that I would have wanted to do anyways. And I think that we got away cheaper this way. But before we get into that, I quickly want to tell you how I went about choosing the right model and year for this project, because before starting this project, I didn't know anything about Harley Davidson. I still don't know a lot about the Imperial system. I need to get into that, screw sizes and all of that. But I learned a thing or two from my first project, the BMW build, where I didn't do too much research before jumping in, and I basically just bought the first bike that looked good to me. So with this one, I knew, okay, I need to do a little bit more research to understand the model history, because Sportsters have actually been around for more than 50 years. The first one was introduced in 1957, and since then, obviously Harley Davidson has made a few upgrades every few years. So for me, it was important to understand which features were introduced when, or which years might have had a few issues. I'm going to link you the resources that I've used down below in the description in case you want to do your own deep dive research before starting a project like this. After I finished mine, I noticed that there are only a handful of criteria that are actually important for this project. And the first one is the engine. From 1957, when the Sportster was first introduced, all the way through to 1985, Harley Davidson used iron cylinder heads, which is also where the term iron head comes from. And in 1986, they made a huge upgrade and introduced this engine, which is the Evo motor. And that apparently was a big upgrade in reliability, but also I heard that these engines are relatively easy to work on. So I wanted to go with this engine, and also all of the models after 67 have an electric start, which I think is a nice convenience for this project. The next big change for me was the transmission change in 1991. All of the bikes before have a 4-speed transmission, and in 1991 they changed it to a 5-speed transmission. So 1991 was my bottom cutoff to get the 5-speed transmission. So with that in mind, we only need to determine the top cutoff. And for me, looking down the timeline, the biggest change was between 2003 and 2004. In 2004, Harley Davidson introduced a new frame for the Sportsters, which has, and that is the critical point, a rubber-mounted engine. And that is supposed to give you a smoother ride in the higher RPMs. You know that for some reason I like impractical bikes and I like bikes that have character. And for me, feeling the bike work, that is part of its character. So this might be a little bit of an irrational decision, but I wanted to do the top cutoff at 2003 to specifically not get the rubber mounted engine. But if you wanted a little bit of a smoother ride, I think the furthest you can push it would be 2006, because in 2007 they replaced the carbs for fuel injection, and I feel like that is the point when you have to hand in your screwdriver and exchange it for a laptop. But if you wanted to hit the absolute sweet spot when selecting your Sportster for a project like this, you would go for an 883R from after 2000, because on the one hand, it has a completely blacked out engine, which just looks cool, but also the parts have a very good resale value. For example, you get dual disc front forks, you have new mag wheels with sealed wheel bearings, which they introduced in 2000, and you also get the orange painted gas tank. But for my area, that would have been way too specific, because contrary to my initial belief, there weren't actually that many fitting listings. I always thought of Facebook Marketplace from the videos that I've watched or the stories that I've heard as this magical thing that would just throw deals at you and you could pick up a bike for relatively cheap. But when I came here, I had to figure out that most of the cheap bikes are either complete pieces of shit, or you get like these fake listings that just want to rip you off. So I actually spent quite a few weeks actively looking on Facebook Marketplace for Sportsters between 1991 and 2003 until I found this one. And I looked for both engine sizes because, as you might know, the Sportsters have two engine sizes, the 883 and the 1200. And even though the 883 only puts out 40 horsepower to the rear wheel and the 1200 60, I wasn't picky which engine I would get, because my plan was this: if I got the smaller engine, then I already had a list of power upgrades that I wanted to install that would make it outperform the 1200. But if I got the bigger engine, then I would be happy with the 60 horsepowers and just save the money for the rest of the build. But then I found this bike, and that's also why I'm so excited about this bike, because even though it started as an 883, it puts out considerably more power than the 1200. And that's mainly because it already has more power upgrades installed than I initially had on my list. And the biggest change is that it's no longer an 883, but it already has a Hammer Performance 1250 big bore kit installed. And that was also on my initial list for power upgrades because it just increases the power so much. Compared to the stock engine, which makes about 40 horsepower and 68 Newton meters, as I've said, this one doubles that. It peaks at 80 horsepower and 114 Newton meters, and you can definitely feel that. And not having ridden this stock bike, but just this one, I think that the stock one would have felt a little underpowered for my liking. So I'm very happy that this kit is already installed, but I'm only happy because I know that it was done well, because the guy who owned it before the guy that I bought it from was actually a Harley employee, and he did all the work himself. It's very well documented, and that's how I know that this kit was installed at 11,700 miles, and only 100 miles later, the bike got the next performance upgrade, which is a Screaming Eagle performance clutch kit. And from my research on this kit, I know that that often happens, that you have to install a performance clutch kit afterwards to actually get the increased power onto the road. So this bike already has those two major upgrades. But that's actually not all, because in addition to the big bore kit and the performance clutch, the previous owner also installed a Mikuni HSR42 carb, which from what I read is supposed to increase throttle response and acceleration and also give it more power and torque across all ranges. And since the guy worked at Harley Davidson, I suspect that he also jetted it right, because if you install the big bore kit, you definitely have to do that. And to make it a full package, he also installed a Bassani 2-in-1 road rage chrome exhaust. So that brings us to a grand total of $2,300 in power and performance upgrades already installed on this bike, which makes it perfect for this project because all of the rest doesn't really matter. As you know by now, my plan is to build an off-road bike, which I know is pretty irresponsible and doesn't really make sense, but I got inspired by the Mint 400 Desert Race Harley Davidson class. I just think this is so cool. This is such a nice project. it gives me a good amount of challenge, but also I hope that it stays within my skill set. The biggest challenge will be the front end swap. I've never done that before, and I want to run motocross forks on this bike. So we need to swap the whole front end out. With that, we're gonna have new triple clamps, new forks, a 20-inch spoked front wheel, and also a completely new handlebar setup with new levers and new switches. To match that in the rear, I'm going to install longer custom rear shocks. I'm going to also exchange the rear wheel for a 19-inch spoked rear wheel and do a chain conversion because at the moment it has a belt drive. Then we have another big project, which will be the relocation of the foot pegs. At the moment, this bike has front controls, which means that your feet are very far forward when you ride this bike, but that doesn't really work for off-road riding. So I want to fabricate some sort of foot peg mount for like MH style foot pegs here in the middle, and also use motocross style brake and shift lever. And then there are a few other upgrades that I would like to do that I think just make sense for an off-road build. The first one would be to deal with this oil tank plug situation. At the moment you can simply pull this out, and I think it just doesn't make sense for an off-road bike. So we need to upgrade that. Then we also have to fabricate or make a custom seat. We're going to install motocross style fenders. And then we also have obviously completely new lights, headlight, rear light indicators. And with that and the new switches on the handlebars, we're also going to have a completely new wiring harness. So I'm going to wire up this bike from scratch. And on the last build, I used M-Unit. But on this build, I want to use the D-Box from Axel, which I'm very excited about to see how it works, how it compares to the M-Unit. So we're going to do a complete rewire of the bike. So that is the general plan for the Sportster. And talking about it, I noticed that there are actually quite a lot of projects that I need to complete before I can enjoy this bike. And I would love to ride it through summer. But even though there isn't much time to waste, I also have one regret with the BMW build, and that is that I didn't ride it before I took it apart. That's mainly due to the fact that it's much harder to get a bike on the road in Germany. So it wasn't registered, but here it's a lot easier, and this bike is in good condition. So I already got it inspected, I got it insured, and I got it registered. So now I can ride it a little bit at least before I take it apart. So that's why in the next one, I'm going to take you on one of the first rides with the Sportster while it's still stock, and then we can start the project. So if you want to follow along on this off-road Harley Davidson Sportster build, then hit the follow button. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.